Hi, I'm glad you've joined my class on balancing brain chemistry. We're going to be talking about the nutritional neurochemistry assessment today. So you may want to download and print that PDF so you can be filling it out as I walk you through it.
All right. So I'm going to go over the new natural neurochemistry assessment, and this is revised. The one I did in my earlier book was only about 3 questions per section, and I decided it would be interesting to look at both sides, and so I created kind of a scoring system where you could look at whether you're low in the chemical or high in the chemical, because too much of a good thing is still a bad thing, and too little is usually what people deal with as a deficiency. But if there's an excess, that's also a problem. So we'll look at both. And we'll start with norepinephrine.
Bicycle, bicycle, bicycle. I want to ride my bicycle, bicycle, bicycle.
So it's kind of handy if you got the handout to have that in front of you and just kind of circle as we go along. And then at the end, I'll just kind of clarify how that works to, get your answer. So norepinephrine that's the chemical that's a stimulant in the brain. And we have a lot of stimulants out there that people use that mimic norepinephrine. And the most common one is caffeine. So if you find yourself craving or depending on a stimulant, and so caffeine is one. There's also, there's some great products out there that try to make stimulants healthier, but depending on, kind of either your value system or your brain chemistry, it may or may not be the best idea. So Zeal is one that people use, and I've even found that even in amino acids, like that are found in Q96 and some of the other things, they're still stimulants. And so I am so sensitive to stimulants, I can't use anything like that. I'm sensitive to chocolate even. So anything that's stimulating for me, in fact, I got some coffee flavored ice cream and it's not good for me. So everything like that is problematic for me. But for some people, they need more of that norepinephrine. So A, that's the first part. B, I have a hard time focusing and paying attention. So I wanted to talk a little bit about ADHD with this, because that is a chemistry that usually needs more norepinephrine and doesn't tend to overload on it very easily. So something that, obviously for treating ADHD, they use stimulants, and they're pretty high doses of stimulants. And it has the effect on someone with ADHD to help them focus and to calm them down in some ways. So I call that reverse chemistry. In the book I mention, I'll just kind of read out of there, that some people with ADHD symptoms or a physiology where the frontal cortex of the brain is understimulated, there is also a lack of norepinephrine. In these individuals, increasing norepinephrine levels can have an opposite effect, causing disorganized, chaotic patterns of behavior to become more organized and calm. In this physiology, the chemical increases the ability to focus and concentrate. If you can relate to this physiology, you'll also find that some of the other chemicals yet to be discussed also have an opposite response. So we'll get back to that. But the thing that I've looked at with this is it does have to do with this frontal. So that's the front part of the brain. And when I was studying in school psychology, in my psychology degree, in my master's, they talked about the research at that time, and that was early 2000, was saying that in people with ADHD, they could actually measure, they had a smaller amount of gray matter. It was about 10% maybe smaller. And that gray matter they're talking about is that frontal cortex. So it was actually underdeveloped and showed up physiologically as being smaller than people who didn't deal with ADHD as a clinical condition. So, and sometimes people say that just because they're kind of spacey. And so there are some things physiologically that are unique with ADHD. But there's also some interesting things I just found in studying this getting ready for this today, that I found really the frontal cortex and the left and right brain, and the left brain tend to have a lot of commonality. So, okay, so there's frontal cortex, and the frontal cortex is that logical, rational, planning, and problem-solving part of the brain. And the left brain, there we go, is also, see that logical, verbal, digital, symbolic, order, very frontal cortex oriented, right? So then if we look back at this part of the brain, the limbic system, emotional and reactive and also kind of creative to some extent maybe, is more like the right side of the brain. And then I learned a term now that there's some new research, that there's something called task positive and task negative functions. And so task positive functions happen in the left brain. So task positive means, all right, I've got a task and I'm going to hone in on it and I'm going to get it done and I'm going to be laser focused. And task negative happens most likely in the right side of the brain, that you're just free to flow and imagine and dream and go into a little fantasy world or create some art, but you may or may not get it done, and you might get distracted in the midst of it and play some music. And so it's just kind of, isn't that fun though? We want to be in task negative mode part of the time. So if you look at ADHD, this is what I found was so interesting, is that they're saying that in studying the brain scans, researchers were able to show that typically developing children switched off their task negative network whenever they saw an item requiring their attention. So task negative again was the right brain. However, unless the incentive was high or they had taken their medication, the children with ADHD would fail to switch off the task negative network and would perform poorly. So, I started to do the reference, and it's on the next page. So this effect of incentives was not seen in children without ADHD. So people without ADHD didn't have to have a high incentive. They would just turn off their task negative network when they were told you need to pay attention. And they just, they could just naturally do that. But what they found was so interesting was, because people will say, well, my kid has ADHD, but they can focus if they want to. And this is why. They've actually found it in brain scans that there's a turn-off switch and there's a choice, I guess, to some extent. But it's something that may take some incentive for some people that want to be here. And I totally thought of my daughter. She is so task negative in life, and she's so fun and she's so cute, and she just lives in that right brain, and she's an artist and we just love her. And so I don't think we always want to turn it off, but I know that she does struggle with math and with a few different things. And so I hope that she'll have, we try to help her have the incentives, but it does make a difference. So that's where they found, to some extent, behavioral programs help with ADHD. And it would be because you need those incentives sometimes. So anyway, there's my little ADHD section on this, but we'll go back to the assessment. So that's one of those things that you might want to look at. And then the other thing, that whether or not somebody has ADHD, they may lack motivation and they may need a lot of incentives to get them going. And so a low level of stimulants in the brain can show up as low energy and low motivation. So that's C. So now let's look at too much. Too much norepinephrine looks like racing thoughts, impatience, having a hard time winding down, falling asleep, tending to be high strung much of the time. And so this is like, I deal with this, and I'm being an observer in my own life and watching how much of the time I feel like we need to get more done, especially with my 8-year-old who's got the ADHD, the task negative brain networking. But I have to be careful to not be so, and I have a lot of that norepinephrine. I do tend to be on that too much side and to get impatient and feel like we've got to be purpose oriented, and get a lot more done. I'm also looking at this, someone who has a lot of this is a type A personality, and we got to be careful not to judge others based on whether or not they're type A. And so I am learning to just appreciate, I don't know if it's the type B or the more relaxed personalities, and find the balance. And so that's our goal. So if you're circling neutrals in there, if you're like, nah, I'm not really one or the other, you may be balanced, which is awesome in this chemical. All right, so let's go down. We'll keep going and look at GABA. So GABA is the opposite. GABA is the depressant chemical. And this is the one that allows the nervous system to relax. So in the nervous system, norepinephrine stimulates the heart. It raises blood pressure. It even, I think, raises temperature. You know, you've heard of people being hot-headed. It's because when they've got all those bursts of energy and emotion, and a lot of times anger is, and I call anger and fear the norepinephrine twins, because they both stimulate the adrenaline. And they, you know, the adrenaline system doesn't know the difference between the two. But GABA is the opposite. And GABA is where you've got somebody who's just very peaceful, very relaxed. So, but sometimes we want to feel that and we're low in it. So in that case, we've got that someone might crave or depend on sleeping pills, alcohol, or benzodiazepines. And I do want to spend just a moment sharing my feelings about those. I can see the purpose in medicating ADHD when it's successful, and usually you don't see much of a dependency as far as addictive patterns developing with someone who's treating it responsibly. But I do see that almost all the time with someone who's low in GABA, who especially starts to depend on benzodiazepines. Benzodiazepines, I found, are one of the most addictive things people can take that's legally prescribed, and they don't always realize what a risk that is. So it does operate the same way as alcohol in the brain. And I do sometimes share that people who have a genetic predisposition with, there's some alcoholism in the family, are especially at risk. If they take benzodiazepines, they're more likely to become dependent on them. And there is a strong tendency for people to develop tolerance. And so let me just kind of list some of the benzodiazepines. Those are Valium, Xanax, trying to think if there's some others. But anyway, the main ones are Valium and Xanax. And so they tend to relax a person, but there's an opposite effect when they wear off. And so the person bounces back up into stress chemistry a lot of times, and then takes them again. And then over time, they've got to have more to, calm their chemistry down. And it's a crazy pattern of bouncing up and down through that. So it is related a lot of times to anxiety. And so that's the fear chemical. So those who have trouble with anxiety or get angry too often, they're experiencing an excess of that adrenaline that's pumping through their system. Or norepinephrine and noradrenaline are actually used interchangeably. And so they're wanting usually to calm down. So that's I wish I had more peace and felt calmer. But sometimes, and this is so interesting, I actually found a research article that looked at resolving anxiety by just reducing caffeine. And they actually found a very high percentage of people who were in treatment for anxiety. All they had to do was cut out caffeine, and lo and behold, the anxiety went away. I had a client that's all we had to do. He came in, I think his second session, I suggested that, and he came back and said, oh, that's all I needed to do. I'm good. So that can happen. And so something to consider. All right. Then let's go on to looking at too much GABA. This is one that just intrigued me as a type A personality. It just boggles my mind that, someone could live with just sleeping all day. and then I realized it's just a different chemistry. So someone with too much GABA A lot of times they're experiencing, that they don't want to get out of bed. They could just sleep all day. They don't have much energy. Their motivation's low. They seem to not really have a strong, or intense sense of worry, which that's a good thing. You want people to just be able to relax, but if they're kind of in a don't care attitude, that could be a problem. If they let too many things go and, just kind of let go of a lot of things that could be purposeful in their lives, but like, for example, getting a job, or school, if like, I can't really get A's and B's, I'll just settle with C's, it's all good. So you kind of worry about them if they're not caring too much. But isn't that crazy? Because we also worry about the ones that care too much and that have to have an A and freak out when they don't. And so back to the balance. If we're balanced in that, it shows up in our lives in a good way. And we can accept, yes, I'm going to strive for an A, but I will accept a B, and not freak out over it. I can have enough energy to get up and do what I need to do, but I can also bring it back down and wind down and fall asleep. So those are nice patterns of balance. And so I think this should make sense, that you're just marking whether it's a yes or no or neutral. And then we're just kind of looking at kind of a general way of gauging this as if there's 3 or more in one column. Then at the bottom, you just kind of circle where you think you're at there. So on to serotonin.